Hello, and welcome back, everybody, to Creatives Chat. Join us for our after show convo as Peter and Ryan continue where they left off from last week's episode.
Yeah.
So join us as we continue to chat about who knows what and why.
Could be fun.
Streaming from Retro Earth Studio and brought to you by
wearehistorically.com, Conscious Brand Apparel, and
raise your vibration and energize your life with specialized Fibonacci tuning forks that deepen meditations and empower self-healing. Get your vibrational sound tools for personal enhancement at energybodytuners.com.
After Show Convo.
For the Fire Guy Ryan recommendation and perspective, what is it about you that is, in terms of like how you see the themes, like what is it that you base your recommendations off of? Like what is it that really strikes a chord within you that you're like, this is why you should read it?
That's a good point. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before either. Wow. I know if something, like it goes back to what I was saying before about like, if something really affects me in a powerful way and makes me think, and if I'm thinking about it after I close it and put it away, then I know it did something right. And I know if it works for me, then it will probably work for somebody else. And it's just a matter of, there's some books you can broadly recommend to anybody who will enjoy it. Like a book like Something is Killing the Children, like I talked about earlier, that has a broad appeal. And anybody who tries that will probably have a good time. That's a great, fun comic that works. But something like Two Moons, you really have to know who you're recommending it to before you can't just say everyone should read this book, because it's got a lot of different things going on in there. And not everyone's going to enjoy it. So a part of it is knowing what can safely be recommended to the masses, but part of it is also tinkering and catering your individual recommendations to people who have, who you know their taste profile, I guess.
Yeah. So it's things the vibe that I'm getting though is it's something that really makes you self-reflect and kind of go inwards, put scenes and situations where it's just like, shit, I don't know what I would do.
Right. And I've read enough comics where like something like Spider-Man, like for example, I don't want to rag on Spider-Man, but I close that and I put it away and it's like, that was fun. What's next? I don't think about Spider-Man too much. Like it's a fun comic, but it's not like, oh my God, I got to talk about this. I got to tell everybody what happened to this week's Spider-Man. Like it never really crosses my mind. It's perfectly fine. It's a great comic. It's a classic, but it's rare for me to, I don't know. You gotta find the right match for what people want.
Art that changes your perspective.
Exactly. And I think the best stuff is something that tries something new.
Ooh. Like
this book about conspiracies that I was talking about earlier, Department of Truth. That's a different one. There's a lot of that book is also not for everybody. There's some people that will get offended if you tell them this book has a chapter about school shootings. That's fun. That's a great time. Some people are going to get really, I know a lot of people actually who dropped that book from their list because they have children. And
too controversial.
It's a sensitive subject. You don't want to think about that. And
really,
it's easier for me to deal with because I don't have kids. So I know it's it's obviously a tragic thing that happens in our world, but it's a little bit removed from me. And it's a good book.
Well, the things that I'm curious on, and it's kind of, I guess, what evokes kind of like the emotion and things within me is like when it is a sensitive subject, that kind of makes me want to explore it even more. I don't know if that's it's like the darker sense of like enjoyment and satisfaction and things, but I guess that's my angle.
I think that's an uncomfortable truth about art too. Like even bad reactions that you get from something, the fact that it's making you feel something. Like there's no worse movie to watch than something that's boring or predictable. Even if it's a bad movie and you can laugh at how bad it is, that's its own kind of fun. It may not be as scary as you want it to be, but if it's goofy and silly and you can have fun watching it and laughing at it, then you're having a good time, even if you're not exactly having the time you wanted to have. But there's nothing worse than like looking at your watch or checking your phone during a movie. Or like, I can't wait for this to be over. Like, is there something else I could be doing?
Yeah. Or the wake up part way up the edge. You're just like,
yeah,
how much did I lose?
fell asleep. Yeah, like I guess it wasn't that great. So yeah, it's all about finding something that really clicks with you and activates some part of your emotional response.
So I guess that's the thing is, if someone comes into you in the store and it's just like, what do you recommend? Like, what are the questions that you ask people to really help them navigate like what they're really yearning for?
I actually had this conversation just the other day on Instagram. I had somebody reach out to me. His name was Brendan. And he said, I'm
Shout out Brendan.
New. Exactly. Shout out Brendan. I'm brand new to comics. Like he watched a video or something and he reached out to me and said, I'm brand new. I've basically never read anything. And that's a rare opportunity for me. Like somebody who's a complete blank slate. And I told him, yeah, I basically did that. I was like, all right, man, like here we go. And we talked for a couple hours. It was a great time. I gave him a list of stuff. I said, you got to read this. This is fun. I told him I'm really into horror and crime. So those two genres I know a lot more about than, Westerns or, romance. Right. Like, so you got to figure out what someone's into, what they're drawn to. I guess a basic question would be like, I hate it, but you got to start with superheroes in some way. You got to be like, what superhero movie did you like recently? What comic book movie? Because usually that's what will draw somebody to trying a comic is seeing a movie or a show that they're like. Like I would actually honestly suggest this Daredevil book to a lot of people who enjoyed the Netflix show. That's a good inroad. And then from there you realize, oh, this writer, Chip Zdarsky, I really liked this story that he wrote about Daredevil. Let me look up and see some other stuff he wrote. And he happens to actually be writing one of my favorite indie books that's not based on a superhero at all right now.
Ooh,
so like it's a book called Stillwater. I don't know if I have it nearby. I should. I do. Stillwater. I've talked about this on the channel before. This is a creepy book.
Yeah.
It's about a town where everybody in the borders of the town does not age, does not get hurt, does not die. So the ramifications of that over time are really freaky because this town does not want to be noticed. They don't want to be seen. They don't want any outsiders to come in. So they have a really kind of dark government and policy about like just executing people who cross the border, for example, or like what people will do to maintain power in this world and how casually they inflict violence on each other, like how casually they shoot and stab each other, knowing that, all it takes is them to kind of like regrow themselves and come back to life. And it's like, there's a lot of questions and thoughts and like strange roads that he goes down with this story.
Yeah. The morality aspect when people are invincible, like
exactly. And there's even morality, like they keep a pen of cows in the town, and they don't eat meat, but some of them do. And so when they want meat, they slice meat off the cow, but it grows back, and they're still in pain. But like it raises questions about like even vegetarianism and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's great.
I love that.
It's a really interesting book. It's one of my favorites, and it's not anything that you would think to try because as a non-comic person, you don't think that stories like this are even told in a comic book.
Ooh, and that's what's so crazy nowadays is because you think of everything of like how popular shows like Black Mirror and all these other shows are like, you think it's like that resurgence of the Twilight Zone type of like creepy, like, like strange dystopian future, like what is it? Love, Sex, and Robots. That was another one that was pretty fun on Netflix. It's just like all the different short animated stories, like all those kind of darker twist of things, like people are more interested, I feel like, than ever, and they're just not even exposed. And this is one of the reasons why I bring it to Creative Chat's audience is because it's like, no, dude, the world of comics is like, it's so vast, and that's just one
way deeper than you think. And I've been thinking about that too a lot leading up to this talk. I assumed that your audience isn't typically a comic audience versus so much just art in general, creatives in general, and I think comics are a really underappreciated form of storytelling.
Oh yeah.
And just being able to see the I'd like to bring it back to the band comparison I made earlier. Like when you listen to a great album, you're listening to the result of a group of people just vibing and working on the same frequency. And a comic book is like the literary equivalent of that. Like you've got you got somebody who writes a story who passes it off to somebody who draws the pencils in the perfect way that the writer didn't even imagine. And then you pass it off to somebody else who drops in colors and just makes the whole thing like come to life in a completely different way. And all of this stuff, just all these people jamming together and like working in sync to tell the best possible story is something that you can't get out of a novel.
I love it. No,
I'm not knocking novels. I mean, I have a whole shelf full of them.
I know,
but it's I don't know, apples and oranges.
Yeah,
they're both great, but they're different.
And that's the beauty of what people really can experience, is that there are so many different aspects of just the realm of comics that, I mean, I consider myself like a casual comic and manga reader. You know, like I pick and choose, but I just know it's one of those forms of expression that like I can't get by watching something. You know, they don't have TV shows that really do it quite justice, because again, there's so much more that you can do in the realm of just storytelling and even just like actual visuals. You can imagine how many of these shows would just be in the gutter just because of how much animation cost it would do to do some of these scenes. Like it'd be ridiculous. But like with the comic, it's like, oh yeah, I can see it all. Whole city's gone. Like
yeah, the imagination potential is much higher. And there's few things more disappointing than being excited to watch a movie get made of your favorite book, and you go watch the movie and it sucks. And
it sucks.
Like I mentioned before, like Game of Thrones is a good example. Like I've been a big fan of that series for a long time, and the TV show really kind of went south near the end once they ran out of books to base it off of.
Right.
And watching something you love kind of devolve into
so
something
quickly.
not so great. Or like Green Lantern is my favorite comic book character.
Ooh.
But that movie, I was there at midnight for the release of the Green Lantern movie starring Ryan Reynolds in 2011. And I knew very early on in the movie that this is not going well. This is not going to be good. This is turning out to be a bad movie. And it was a depressing experience. So sometimes it's just safer to go to the source material and stick with that.
Facts.
Leave it
Well,
there.
I'm curious. So for me, the selection, I find that the Green Lantern selection, I was first introduced to Green Lantern really primarily like a lot of people in the Justice League animated show back when I was younger. And this was already like, you know, the concept of just having that merit and having that integrity to be chosen to be a defender of like your universe has always been a pretty dope concept as a child. Like, what is it for you that like pulls like Green Lantern, like, yes, this is my lane. I'll fuck with that.
It's another one of those books. Going back to my college roommate, Green Lantern was a series that he had on his wall, and it was a superhero I'd never really know. I didn't watch that cartoon. I didn't really have any exposure to this character. Actually, my first experience with Green Lantern was a video game that we played in that dorm room. He had a game called Mortal Kombat versus DC.
Oh, yes.
It's what it sounds like. You know, you get Sub-Zero versus Batman, or you know, whatever. You fight each other. And Green Lantern was one of the characters in that game. I had no idea who he was, but I was just drawn to the vibrant green colors of the things he would make with his ring for fighting, and that made me realize like this character's kind of cool. I don't know anything about it. There's no like Green Lantern movie at that point, and so I noticed that he had some comics on his wall, and I read those, and they are some of these books.
Okay.
And the way that this specific writer, Jeff Johns, told the Green Lantern story back in the mid 2000s, specifically about the whole concept is based on you are chosen to get this power if you demonstrate great will and confidence and perseverance and just the personality traits that make you chosen by. It's a long story, but the thought and the ability to kind of overcome fear and not be scared by stuff has always resonated with me as somebody who is classically, I'm pretty shy and I'm timid, and I respected and found a lot to look up to in somebody who can just overcome that stuff. So much so that I got a Green Lantern tattoo with my brother and I. Actually, he got a he got a Blue Lantern tattoo on his forearm. We got matching tattoos in Vegas for his 21st birthday. Even though I don't think he knows the bare minimum about the Blue Lanterns and like the relationship that those groups have. For me, it works on a symbolic level.
Yeah, I love it.
For him, it's a cool brother tattoo that we got together, and they had different meanings for both of us. For me, it has both because I'm familiar with the comics. So for me, it works as a brother tattoo, like a bonding moment, and on a deeper level in the sense of the story.
That's a thing right there, where it's you look at the aspect of how the interlay and themes and just happenings that are naturally developed through the stories and how characters kind of grow and the universes that they create and how they impact people. I've always found an eerie parallel when I've been either, reading a manga or a comic or like watching a show based off one, and just how much the themes just hit home to where I'm at in my life. I think that's something that is always a good testament to a good tale. Is just like, is it timeless? Is it going to really be able to hit people in the heart, in the gut, whenever, wherever? And that's the stuff that like, oof.
That's the key to making an enduring superhero, especially something that's the goal of writing a superhero comic is to make something that can be told over and over and over and over and over for endless story possibilities. And that's why when you drill down to what makes each one of those characters work, if you're doing it right, your story will talk about Captain America's idealism, for example, and their commitment to justice. You got Tony Stark, somebody who is very much a victim of pride and ego, and he has addictions, and he's got issues that most people can identify with on that level too. He's got a lot of flaws, but that's what makes somebody like him interesting. He's got flaws, but he's also one of the sharpest minds around. So there's things to identify with and things to idealize, but also things to kind of be wary of. And obviously, I think Spider-Man is probably the biggest example of like every kid felt like the dork in school at times, and is a lot of people are familiar with the idea of hiding behind cracking jokes and being sarcastic and silly when really underneath you're struggling with a lot of stuff, and there's stuff to identify with in a lot of these characters. That's what makes them sing. That's what makes it work.
This makes them sing.
Exactly. Some of them work better than others.
Definitely. Well, I guess that's the themes. Like, what themes always usually generally pull really heavy at your heart, or like get you to be like, yeah, that's me. I know you mentioned one aspect of just like the, I don't know, kind of overcoming like the fear, those things of just like the will and like the fight, the courage, that aspect. But what is it about some of the kind of darker stories that kind of entertain that aspect of just like, oh, my heart's getting something out of this?
For me specifically, I think of it like, I wish I had that idea. I'm like something about it. It just works on such a simple, pure way. Like the fun for me is seeing. It goes back to the ripple effect. Yeah. Like part of the fun of storytelling is you have the idea and then seeing how that can grow and develop over time. Like I'm thinking about it just because it's sitting right in front of me. But something like Stillwater. This little kid is looking at me with
those creepy eyes,
creepy red eyes. But you think about it, and like in issue 1, you get introduced to this town, and you're like, "Oh, people can't die here. People don't grow. That's weird. That's scary." And then you look at it, and the current story arc of this story is dealing with the children in this town, and everybody. It turned on at some point, which is the weird part. Like the non-aging thing, whatever is affecting this town, just started at some point. It happened.
Yeah.
So you have people across all ages are suddenly just frozen in their life at that point. And this current story arc is dealing with the children in the town. And like you have people in kids' bodies who are 20, 30 years old, but stuck in the body of a child. And like the way the story just focuses on so many different unforeseen kind of, like that would be the case. That would be what happens. Like what happens when you kill a cow for its meat and the cow doesn't die and the cow just sits there in pain and you're stabbing the cow and taking its skin and its muscles and eating the cow, but it doesn't die and it just regrows. Like, and you're left to examine like all of these aspects of life. And like they drink shots on their birthday to try and get drunk, but you only feel it for like 5 seconds because your body is
just
constantly like repairing and stuck in this place. You can't get drunk, and like,
oh wow, yeah,
that's a good thing in some ways. You don't have alcoholism in that society, but you also can't have, you know, that release or that like element of the party, and people, you're kind of stuck. And all of the different like ways you can tell a story in that world.
Yes, yeah, I love it.
Like,
I love it.
It's unforeseen, and that's part of what draws me to stuff like this, specifically like the non-superhero stuff, where like Batman, you know, no matter what happens, he's gonna go back to the Batcave, and Alfred's gonna be there, and they're gonna look on the Bat computer, and they're gonna find, you know, oh, what's the Riddler up to now? Let's go solve that mystery, and they're gonna win, and he's gonna come back and start all over again. And then there might be some roadblocks along the way, like right now in Batman, Alfred is dead. Alfred has been dead and gone for a few years.
Spoiler alert, folks.
They'll find an Alfred clone, or he'll build a robot or something.
They'll do something.
He'll get resurrected. And the boring part about superhero books is that eventually things always go back to the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And you can get something different with independent books like Stillwater or Two Moons or Department of Truth. All of these books are telling fresh stories that there is no status quo. Like anybody can die at any moment. One of my favorite books recently has, I don't want to give it away because it's a spoiler, but there is, in one of my favorite comics right now, the main character dies a few issues in, and suddenly his best friend is now the main character.
Oh,
and the story just goes off in a totally different direction. You're like, oh, I had no idea that was going to happen, but I am very much here for it. It's you don't get that with Batman. Even if Batman dies, he has died, you know, he's going to go through some magical mumbo jumbo where it's like, oh, turns out he wasn't dead, he just got blasted back in time, and now
different universe.
It's cool, and that you don't get that kind of story in the independent books either.
Yeah,
mostly. So like it's all different, and everyone's got different taste, obviously, but for me, I'm drawn more towards the unique stuff that I don't like the safety net of the superhero comic when you know that it's gonna go back to normal.
Right there, though, is probably the perfect word for it, the safety net. I just think it's really cool because like you're in this aspect of creation right now. It's like content creation, like being able to really, again, you're creating your own world for the viewers as I look at it. Yeah. And for me, it's like, for me, man, totally, like channels like your guys's, like hands down, help people like me out, because I don't have the time to look into the different authors. I don't have time to look into the different teams. I don't have time to do that. Like I'm doing all my other ish, and being able to like decompress and know it's going to be something that's going to like be an experience and not just something that I'm just like, did I just really just like waste like 15-20 minutes reading that? Like,
yeah, that's something I particularly try to bring to our channel too, because we have a crew on Comic Tom 101. There are 5, maybe less. I should know this number. There are a number of co-hosts on our channel.
Yeah.
We have different strengths and different things that we bring to the table. Mm-hmm. Like the main video, I guess you could say, on our channel is released every Saturday, and it is done by Tom and by Russ, and the two of them report every week on comics, the 10 comics that have bumped up most in value based on a new trailer drops for a Moon Knight, and suddenly everybody's trying to buy Moon Knight comics. Yeah, the value of a Moon Knight comic suddenly is worth, like, it's interesting to watch the ebbs and flows of the market in that sense. I personally don't really care about that. That's not my forte. My contribution to the channel is the actual stories and the stuff that's happening right now, and I think that's an element of comic fandom in general that needs to be that's a perspective that needs to be heard and told, and it's helpful in that sense. Like it's helpful to know, like, oh hey, I might have a book in my box over here that's suddenly like this Spider-Man book that I was showing earlier, wherever the hell it is. This is the first appearance of some random new character in Spider-Man. Goblin, the Queen Goblin, just showed up for the first time this week. This is a $4 comic. You buy it off the shelf, but because this person first appears in it, it's now worth like $15. Like if I wanted to, I could go sell this and make like triple the money I spent on it. And some people, that's all they want to do with comics, and it's like a hustle. And it is kind of exciting to know that, like, oh wow, like, there's value there, which I didn't even realize.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a story, and like I'm in it for the entertainment aspect and the art of the story that's being told in there. So I try to bring that perspective to my appearances on the channel when Tom and I go live twice a month, roughly.
Yeah. I think that's the perspective I think I would appreciate more, is because there is so many, like dude, I mean, that's the thing, is like everything's constantly expanding. And I feel that's the avenue of technology that we're in now, where it's like more and more dope artists and writers are going to start to get their exposure. And it's just going to kind of continue to grow in all the different genres. It's like, how do we keep our fingers on everything? Like I'd almost love to see like a little top genre, each one, like top 3 genre recommendations, like, this week.
I'm slowly growing my own stuff on my own channel.
Oh yeah.
It's hard to find the time, and it's hard to do by yourself. I've learned too. I think that's why Tom originally reached out to me and to Russ, and to help and to have people on his channel that he can talk to and have a conversation, and someone to go back and forth with, versus one person just speaking to the camera directly. There's a different flow that goes on there. But I am trying to do my own thing, to do videos that Tom and I don't necessarily have the time to do. I am working towards, right now, my first video was on the best comics of 2021.
Yeah, good edit, by the way. I know what it's like when you do edits. It's just like, oh shit, you're doing it.
It's kind of fun. It's a different muscle that I'm working with. But I'm gonna try and do my next step. I don't want to jump too far and make too many goals and fail. My next small increase step is going to be 5 favorite comics every month, so I can kind of give a more zoomed in look at some stuff that isn't necessarily like best of the year, top tier comics, but something that's a little good, but not that good. There's different layers, but the idea is in my head now, like we were talking about. I just like lists. I like the idea of lists and ranking stuff. And the idea of like, what are some good creative teams? What are some best stories in the genre? What are some best stories of different decades? What are some best stories at DC specifically? Like there's different ways to give your perspective and your opinion. And I think for me, that's an easy way to add more content to my own channel, is giving that perspective that I absorb every week. I read like 30 books a week, and it's probably that's a fair number. Yeah, that's about right. I want to be doing more, but I can't.
It's that Fire Guy Ryan refined taste, where it's just being able to, you could have a little segment on it where it's just this breakdown on books that really just get you going. Like I think that would be, for me, I know personally, like the horror aspect, like just like some top horror comics that just like really just get it. That would be one that I'm like, I'd watch that. And I think that's the opportunity here that's so dope, is like we're at a point now where it's like we can really just create our own lane and do what we want. Like we're at a weird generational time where it's like, if you have like the opportunity and like the kind of like the courage and the will to just go out and just like do it, and just like really, because that's all that's happening, is you're giving your perspective. And it's just that one thing that people value, that type of authenticity, more and more nowadays. And I think that's growing. And especially when you can lead someone to having that experience through their own, just like of their own creation, obviously, like with the team, that they're reading, but like to be able to have their own experience like that. Those are those deeper types of satisfaction that I don't think people really understand when it's like to really point people towards art, like, oh, it's beautiful.
It is a fun experience when you recommend something and somebody comes back and says, that was awesome. Thank you. Like, I appreciate your recommendation. It's just like, oh, cool. Okay. It's something for me that happens with comics these days, but we've all had that friend that's like, hey, this is my favorite album. You should try it. I really like this band. This movie was cool. Let's watch this show. You would like this show together. Let's watch it. Like that's part of the fun of art, is sharing it with people that matter to you, or even people that you don't know, even strangers, people that come into a comic shop. They're like, what should I try? Like, this is cool. I've been enjoying this. And hearing that, that my perspective has had an impact on somebody is a unique, but also really awesome feeling.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think definitely hands down with how much you've talked AWA up, like I looked into them more because I was just like, ooh, I like, that's like numerous times you've mentioned them. Like, so I was, even before this in different conversations that I was looking into, I was just like, okay, so AWA is really bringing the heat, and they are. They're like,
brand new too. Like they started at 2020. They're like, unfortunately, they had the worst timing in the world. They started a comic book company right when the industry shut down, right when everything locked down.
Yeah.
But they have done so many good, strong comics that it's so hard to cut through. Like, it's a very crowded industry. And the fact that a new publisher could come in and tell such strong stories. And one of their comics has been picked up and is potentially going to be a movie, or I think it's going to be a movie. It's a book called Chariot that they did. I don't know if you read Chariot. It's a year or two old at this point. It's about a car that has, so there's like a secret agent lady who drives this car off a bridge or something. It's this high-tech car, and she's in this chase, and she ends up driving off a bridge, and she dies in the car, and her spirit gets like sucked into the machine of the car. And you fast forward like 20 or 30 years later, and this mechanic guy is working on it, and suddenly her ghost kind of like pops out of the car.
Yes.
And it's a car action spy movie. It feels like a movie when you're reading it, which is part of the fun of AWA specifically. There's something about the way they write and draw that, like, it's almost like they're making these thinking that they're going to be movies eventually. And I think once this Chariot movie gets made,
that's the new.
I think a lot of people are going to look at the rest of their stories and say, like, what else can we make here? And I think this company is really going to pop off in the best possible way. I hope so, at least. I have great faith in them. I feel like they should be paying me money at this point for how much I talk them up. I love those guys. And
sponsorship, folks. Come on, AWA. Come on, hook them up.
Yeah. But they're just really small. Like, let me show you. I actually got one right here.
Yeah.
This is a book they're doing now called Telepaths, for example. But one of the things I love most about this company is on the back of every issue, they show you exactly what comics they're making right now. And it's not that many. This is like, what, 4, 5, 6, 7. They have like 7-ish books coming out at a time. And they tell you exactly what's coming out. And so it's small. It's a small enough publisher for me. Like, I am getting every single book that they do. And I'm really, really loving it. They've done some great work.
See, that's
not so much this one though. That's okay though. They can't all be winners.
But see, that's the kind of dope aspect that I see is the evolution of, getting your work out there as a creative means. Is that I didn't even think about that in terms of really having your comic be like a stepping stone to us, like literally having it just be like a living screenplay practice run.
Yeah.
That's a different angle that I haven't even really comprehended, because that'd be something that's actually a lot more realistic when you think of, I think this is one of those things where I even think this is a great question, more so for Rusty, because he knows the process a little bit more in terms of just like the screenplay process and just like pitching a film, like being able to have a successful comic be like, this is a testament, like you could read this front to back, that's a solid movie or a mini series, being able to see that is pretty, I don't know, that's exciting to me.
That's, when I think about it like that, that's somebody's job at a film studio, is to read and try different things. And someone's job, someone out there is reading Stillwater, for example, and is talking to somebody at a studio somewhere saying, like, we got to buy the rights to this. This is a great story. We got to make this. Just pro tip, someone needs to make Stillwater happen on screen, because that would be a great show.
Oh, Netflix series.
Just throwing that out there into the ether. Hopefully manifesting that idea into reality. But it's somebody's out there doing that right now, like absorbing the stories that are only happening in comics and realizing the potential that's happening here, especially now, like you've mentioned before, like now there is this really particular wave of independent comics, stuff that's not superheroes. We've all seen 10 different Spider-Man movies and 10 different Batman movies over the years, but now we are slowly starting to see fresh stories, movies that are based on comics that you might not even realize are based on a comic book. Like, there's a movie coming out now with Jennifer Lopez and Owen Wilson that I saw a trailer for, where he's like in the audience. Owen Wilson plays like a fan of hers at a concert. I don't think she's playing herself. I think she plays some musician, and he's holding up a sign that says, like, please marry me, or something, like people do. And I guess they get married, and that's based on a comic. Like that's a weird comic book. And like, it doesn't have to be Superman, there's, and the fact that they are making this book, like, I've got it right here. I've talked about it so many times, but Something is Killing the Children.
Yeah.
It's going to be a show, and it's got potential to really pop off in the best possible way. I think if they do it right, this could be like the next Stranger Things, something that really like captures everybody's imagination.
And all the different generations and gaps, and
and Stranger Things was an original idea, right? That's not based on it's heavily influenced by certain other stories, but it's not based on a comic. But this is, and I think once this, if this show hits the right way, I think there's going to be a lot more eyes on other comic books that could make really good adaptations and maybe make a big splash in the world of normal people, not necessarily comic fans.
And I don't want to knock this one, but from having read the comics for at least for when I was interested in it, I kind of dropped after a while. It kind of lost me. But Sweet Tooth, that's another one where it's just like, I don't think they did the adaptation enough to me. I don't think they did it well enough for me to really like bite into it fully. But like, it's one of those ones that it's like potential. There's so much potential in the world.
A lot of people love that show. I haven't watched the show. I've read a little bit of the comic, and it's good. I can recognize that it's well made. It is a classic. It's a modern classic for a reason. It's not my cup of tea. I didn't love the comic. I haven't watched the show, but like my brother, for example,
that's funny.
He was like, "Oh, I'm watching this show, Sweet Tooth. It's pretty cool." And I was like, "Hey, you should try the comic." And he's like, "No." So there we go. In the future, Zachary, you should try reading the comic. I know he's watching this in the future.
Oh yeah, got to get the highlight shout out as well. But that's just the cool thing where it's like there's so much potential for creatives nowadays, and just even when you look at the opportunities that lie if these other shows really hit. That to me, I think, is just the real untapped market, because I already know like one of the reasons why I watch anime is because the I guess you would say the production teams that are doing the animes, I know they won't screw up the manga. And when I watch the anime, I know it's just like, yep, this is bringing a different experience that you couldn't get just from reading the panels and different cutscenes. How do they do those transitions? Where it's just like, man, if they can bring that to like that type of reality to some of these live action stories, like. Oh,
yeah, and it goes back to that typical Hollywood thing where they're like, Hollywood is a pretty conservative type of the world where they don't. Every movie is a multi-million-dollar project, and you don't want to like throw around that much money on something that might not work.
Yeah, hella risk aversion.
So once something does work, that's why things get sequelized to death, and that's why we get so many reboots of like Ghostbusters or something that people know is a thing that people love, and it's already got like a built-in audience. It's a safer venture than trying something completely brand new. So once something is killing the children, blows people's minds on Netflix, hopefully, once that happens, then I think other studio people are going to be like, let's look at the comic books. Let's find some other cool comic that nobody else has worked on, and let's get the ball rolling. Like that's starting to happen. Like Lock and Key and Umbrella Academy. And things like The Witcher, like that's not a comic necessarily, but
still that video game adaptation, like
right. Okay. And it has been made into comics, so like there are Witcher comics, but I think we're starting to see that happen.
I'm gonna pop in real quick. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Rusty.
So the one that came to mind right now that you're talking about turning obscure comic books into movies was Why the Last Man.
Ooh, yeah.
I love it. He just pulls it.
I've got that down here, but it's way at the bottom. I'm not going to grab it. But yeah, that's a great comic. The show was terrible, and it got canceled.
Yeah. They took a risk on that one. I don't think they executed it right.
Correct. I am of the belief that I don't think that book can be made into a movie or a show.
Oh, really?
They tried it before in 2008 or so. There was a lot of. They've been trying to make that book into a movie and a show for a while. But the premise of that is every man on the planet dies. Every human male, every male giraffe, every male rhinoceros, every male organism on the planet dies, and everything that's left is all the females. And the show did some interesting stuff with that premise, but they tried to get it off the ground in 2008 with like Shia LaBeouf as the main character, and they rightly realized like this doesn't work. They realized before the show even started that like we should probably just cancel this. This isn't it's been in development, I think at least 3 separate times. And it didn't work. I think some things like that's one of the reasons I think Green Lantern is a really big risk on screen, because it's really goofy. Like you got this magic ring that can make any shape, anything that you can imagine. and it works well in static images on a page, but like when it's brought into motion and action, it has this like unfortunate just goofiness that's really hard to get past.
Yeah, because I mean, it's even the acting aspect. When you're acting it, you have to act all that out with something,
Right.
and it's just, I think it's one of those things where it just creates too much of the more unnatural disconnection, or something that can be more fluid. Like that's why I'm very curious about the new Batman that they're going to do, because I've heard that it's a little bit
So
more
excited.
like, I've heard it's a little bit more that noir-esque, like in terms of like some of the cutscenes and some of the shots that I've already seen. I'm just like, okay, I kind of like this like darker, like has that indie film vibe. Like,
Yep.
I'm very curious how they're going to take it.
I can't believe it's now less than a month away, that movie, and I'm so pumped. Like it looks like they're nailing Batman in the way that nobody has yet.
Surprisingly, not much hype. I feel I haven't really heard much grumbling about it, or really seen much big like build up.
Early on, there was definitely a lot of grumbling when Robert Pattinson. They're like, the Twilight guy.
Yeah,
and everyone got mad, but I remember
a plus above Ben Affleck.
Exactly. Yeah. Not to knock him too hard, but I don't know. I remember when they announced Heath Ledger as the Joker back in the day, and I was like, him?
Yeah.
Like that guy from all the romance movies? Like, he's the Joker? Like, what are you thinking? I was one of those people who was all you're just grumbling and complaining, and then I saw the movie and like, like that's one of
by far.
That's one of the greatest performances in any film I can think of. Like he just
and probably the one he'll be most remembered for.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, hands down.
I still think he's probably the best actor to even take on that character, even though I've loved every version of the Joker over the years for different reasons. I think every actor brings something unique to that role. But
interesting. Even the Leto version, huh?
I think even Jared Leto brought something, like even in the trailer of that movie, when you see him like just smiling and like he was like threatening Harley Quinn or something in the trailer, there's something truly unhinged and menacing about him that he brought to that role, even in brief glimpses that I don't think anybody else has quite done in the right way.
I could see it. I can see what you're talking about. I think that's the big issue that I see is, this is when you get into the studio, who's cutting it, who's editing it, who's getting the final say. Because I think that's the one where I feel like the DC, especially compared to Marvel, if we're going to look at the two universes, like DC has, I feel, been plagued by just shitty production teams and like the studios that just butcher these amazing cuts. That's like,
that's what
had a good one.
And they have the curse of trying to play catch up to Marvel when they should be leaning into what makes their movies work, what makes their comics work. For the longest time, the reason I prefer DC to Marvel. And one of the main reasons is their stories work better as standalone. We're going to tell this story and that's it. Whereas Marvel, you kind of have to do a little more work to research, like, what is the best run of Daredevil that I should read? Maybe I have to go back and read the run from 2007 or whatever.
They created too many universes.
Right. They've been going on for so long, and Marvel as a comic company has never done a line-wide reset or a reboot. Like everything that ever happened to Spider-Man has happened to him. Whereas DC at least 2 or 3 times throughout the 80 years that they've been a company, they have done complete resets and started over at number 1, and there are much easier spots to like jump in on and try a character or a run. So I think DC the movies are starting to lean into the standalone nature that their comics have embraced for so long. Something like the Suicide Squad is a much better standalone single movie, and it doesn't necessarily need to be part 17 of an overall MCU style decades long project. Like The Joker is a good example, like a standalone single movie with Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah. Hopefully they just do one of those. I would like to watch a sequel, but I hope they don't make one. And I don't know. They're getting there. Like the Peacemaker show on HBO Max, everyone's loving that. There's going to be a Green Lantern show on HBO Max that I really hope works. This Batman movie is getting several spin-offs on HBO Max. Like there's going to be a Penguin series, and there's going to be a series that deals with the Gotham City Police Department, and they're all. I'm really hoping that DC finds the magic, because they don't get enough credit.
Well, and Gotham had a potential to be. I'm the one on Fox. Like Gotham had a potential where I was just like, ooh, I really like that following a young Bruce Wayne, like that
Right.
could have been a really well done series. But I just don't. I think that's the kind of issue that I see is, are they going to make it too gimmicky? Are they going to bring it too much into the cliche storylines? Are they going to try to force things that don't make sense in certain lights? Where I have all the hope that they make these genres more, I would say, like digestible and more popularized, which is like really good storytelling, because I think that's what the thing a lot of people miss. It's the same thing, it's like from the whole kind of animated realm of just like comics, manga, anime, just like graphic novels, like everything just kind of gets pushed down as this lesser version of art, where it's just like, no, dude, the best stories I've ever read in my life are comics and manga, like ever, like hands down. Like I'm talking like compared to some like, I mean, again, I'm comparing to like Dune. I mean, I shouldn't compare to Dune, but like that's its own thing.
Sure.
But like even for me, like to be able to bring the same experiences and pull at the same emotions, maybe not at certain depth, but it's a different experience. Obviously, like Lord of the Rings, like reading those through compared to just like, yeah, I don't know. It's apples and oranges, but it's still like there's
oranges, but the Lord of the Rings,
it's untapped. It's untapped.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to imagine that as a graphic novel.
They've done it, and it's not as good. It's something about it doesn't work as well, and there's some kind of deeper conversation here underneath. Like, what's the strengths and weaknesses of each, art form, and something about the novel. Like, and again, I think there's a reason there haven't really been that many successful Dune comics, for example. Yeah. There is one or two series right now that examine like the history of some of the, I don't know Dune, but there's one called Dune House Atreides is a series that's out right now. So I think it gets into the backstory of the family of the main character. But as far as like direct adaptations go, like stuff like that, like Lord of the Rings, something with that epic of a scope is unless you do it right, it's very hard to do in a comic because of the scope and the nature of the things you're having to imagine. When you have someone draw it, you're basically saying, this is what it looks like. So the image that you get in your head of these magical, this crazy tower and it's Sauron's tower in Mordor, you don't visualize that in your head when you see it on the page. Like, it's way different to take.
Yeah.
I was a little bit leery when they were announced that they were going to make that into a movie, because I've seen the animated version of The Hobbit and I was like, I was cringing. But I think Peter Jackson set a whole new standard on filmmaking when he shot that, because he shot I think all three of them all at the same time, which hadn't been done before.
Yeah. It took him quite a few years.
But I was actually quite impressed. Now, who doesn't love the movies, I felt the same way with Watchmen. When I heard that Watchmen was going to be made, I was like cringing, like, don't ruin it. Please don't ruin this book. And like, I agree with you from part one. That was probably, to me, my number one graphic novel is Watchmen.
And the HBO show hit and miss with me.
Oh man, I'm gonna hard disagree with you there. The HBO series of Watchmen is one of the best things.
Did I not get into it enough? Did I stop too early?
If you didn't watch the whole thing, I think you owe yourself to watch the whole thing, because it's not that long. They only made one season. It's a mini series, but in terms of adapting something, like I think more. I think more live action projects need to take that example, where you have, especially with Watchmen, you have a different example. You have the original comic from the 80s, and then in 2009 they did a really accurate job of translating that book into a movie. It's one of the more accurate adaptations of a comic to a live action project.
Yeah.
Whereas the Watchmen series on HBO, it's calling it a series. It's a mini series. There's one series. I think it was like 10 episodes.
Yeah. I think I stopped at like 3.
Oh man, yeah, you missed the best one. The best part is in the middle.
Okay. I'll give it a go. Give
it another shot. It's not so much a direct adaptation of the comic, but it tackles some of the same themes. It's at the same time an adaptation as it is a sequel. So it's I wish other adaptations of comics and books in general, I wish there would be more versions like that, where it's more like a spiritual adaptation, where it nails the essence and the tone and the flavor.
Ooh, spiritual adaptation.
And it brings it to a new audience, but it's also different enough to where fans of the original source material can watch it and experience something brand new. Whereas when a comic fan watches the Watchmen movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know, oh, this is the part where he jumps out the window. Oh, this is the part where he's in prison. Like, you know what's coming. And it's cool to see it, realized on screen. But it's even cooler to watch somebody completely reinterpret it in a way you weren't expecting.
And on the flip side,
like
it's
that.
hard to watch it when you're like, no, they didn't do it in the right order. Wait, that's not what happened. I wanted to scream in my seat in the theater going, no, you skipped a whole part.
Exactly.
Yeah. And well, I guess that's the aspect right there, is being able to look of your own judgments to fully experience something. And I think that's probably one of the realms where it's like when you do have such a long, I guess you'd say, a legacy of just history with certain characters, and just it can be pretty brutalizing. I think there's no bigger polarizing event that we saw with all this than Star Wars recently with the new trilogy. It's like either we're about it or you weren't.
There's fewer groups of people, unfortunately, too, that are less judgmental than comic book fans. Like, they are classically known as stubborn, cranky jerks. Like, there's a reason the comic book guy on The Simpsons is like the stereotypical comic book nerd, where they are opinionated, they know what they want, and they're vocal about it. And it's a disservice, I think, to have that approach to stuff. But sometimes you can't help but be vocally judgmental.
Yeah. No, I guess that's the thing right there, is being able to articulate the perspective less abrasively. But that's the one thing that I think is really cool to see, is that I feel of all the different communities that have kind of handled the different rush of fandom to like the industry, I think for the most part it's been the exact opposite reaction. I feel like that's the one cool thing is there's a lot of like, I mean, kind of like yourself, like people that like to give the recommendations, that are willing to, that are like kind of excited to be like, oh yeah, what are you into? That's the stuff where you feel like it would be a lot more of a closed off experience. But there's been so much more exposure to comics that people, I feel like, are now like, it's almost a new thing, like it's a new in thing or a new trend. But now people but it got enough eyes on it where now people are staying there, and it's just creating a different culture. Like just seeing the different comic creators and their comic content creators, I should say, on Instagram, and just to see the communities, very friendly comments for the most part, unless it's someone's top 10.
Exactly. Yeah, and it took me a while to realize too that even though something may not be my thing, that it's very rare that you read a comic that is just bad. Like it's a skill I've had to grow recently, where like even though I don't like it, it's probably not awful, and it's probably someone else's cup of tea, even if it's not necessarily my thing. So seeing the merit and the value in everything, regardless of my own personal appreciation for it, has been a skill I've had to develop specifically with comics. And I think for me, it comes from, because I have a writing background, it took me a while to fully grasp the value and the nuances of the art side of comics, because that's really half of the experience when you're reading a comic, is the story and the art. They're like 50-50. And for me, for the longest time, I didn't really care what the art was. Like, I'm in it for the story. I want to know what happens. And it took a lot of active effort and growth for me to start to really zoom in on the details in the artwork and appreciate what artist A can bring to something that might have been different than what artist B would have done, for example, and recognizing the strengths and differences of different styles and techniques, and whether or not something works in black and white when it could have been colored. There's all kinds of different new things that I've had to think of personally when it comes to artwork, because that's not a thing I have a lot of experience and exposure to. Whereas when it comes to writing, like when I read something, my brain processes it and breaks it down and thinks about what the script for this must have looked like, and how the writer must have been working when they created all of it. And just I zoom in much closer to the words than the artwork.
Interesting.
But being a comic person has helped me grow and appreciate the visual side of it too.
I like that. And that's another angle too that I'm really curious about your perspective on, is in terms of just this whole experience of going to, I would say like the everyday, like 9-to-5 life, transitioning into this more one of kind of just like liberation with just different, like, I mean, it is in a sense, it's kind of like its own form of liberation. It's like, it's like more creative angle of work and expression. Like, how is just this whole transition to and from like impacted your perspective on things? Just like from just life to like what you're interested in to just the potentials of things.
It's the biggest change has been from working a real job at a hotel and like punching a clock and just doing work and then coming home and having to spend my free time doing the things I like. This is a weird change for me where now my job is doing things I like. And like, it's literally my job to read this stuff, to bring home this pile of comics from the shop and learn about the industry and what's going on now. And it's still, even over a year later, it still hasn't hit me that like, this is my job. Like, I'm getting paid
This is my
to like talk about comics with people when they come into a shop. I'm getting paid to say like, hey, you should try that book over there. That one's pretty cool. I think you'll like it. It's still hasn't hit me. Yeah, that's what they say, right? Like, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Ooh, and with that, this has been quite the exploration into comics and the perspectives of one of the new up-and-coming evaluators and recommenders themselves, Fire Guy Ryan. I was gonna say, thanks again for coming on the show, man. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it's a small world.
And it probably won't be the last time our paths cross. But with that, we gotta say thanks for watching, viewers. Be sure to subscribe, check out Fire Guy Ryan over at Comic Tom 101, and over at his Instagram, see his handle. With that, roll the outro.
Okay.
Thanks again to our sponsors for making this show possible. Thank you, We Are Historically, for your conscious human apparel. Shop online at wearehistorically.com.
Level up your life and raise your vibration with specialized Fibonacci tuning forks. Get your vibrational sound tools for your personal enhancement at energybodytuners.com.
Another creative art production by Retro Earth Studio.
And like, even when I take the stack of comics home every week and I'm sitting here reading a book, and it's like, it feels like it's my free time, and it is, but at the same time I am working in a sense. Like, I am digesting all this information that will help me do my job better.
Yeah, studying, doing your research, watching tape.
Exactly. And like, it's interesting. It just it hasn't fully hit me in. Apparently, I don't know if it ever will at this rate. Like, it's fun, and I'm just glad that it's still fun.
That concludes this episode of Creatives Chat. Thank you for watching our show. Click the bell button to get notified of future episodes. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thank you, Fire Guy Ryan, for coming on Creatives Chat. Stick around for the after show combo. And we would like to ask our subscribers and our viewers to check out your channel as well.
Yeah.